Anne of Cleves, the fourth wife of King Henry VIII, has been historically portrayed as the wife who was too ugly for the king. But was she really that unattractive, or is this just a case of historical slander? Anne was born in Dusseldorf on September 22, 1515, to Johann and Maria Geldem. Her father ruled the Duchy of Cleves, a small territory in present-day northwestern Germany, until his death in 1538, when Anne's brother Wilhelm became duke. Growing up at the court, Anne was not educated in the manner typical of European royalty at the time. She enjoyed doing needlework. However, she was lacking in the range of courtly accomplishments expected of an English noblewoman, playing a musical instrument, singing, dancing, and the ability to converse wittily in at least one or two languages besides English. Anne spoke no languages other than German, which would later prove a difficulty in her marriage to an English monarch. Despite these possible failings, Anne was considered a desirable marriage prospect due to her family's political holdings. At the age of 12, Anne was betrothed to Francis, son of the Duke of Lorraine. This was not unusual for a girl at that time. The prospective groom was only 10, so there was no hurry for the marriage. Eventually, the support for this marriage petered out and the betrothal was put aside. This left Anne's family free to seek other marriage prospects. However, it would cause problems for Anne later in life. In 1539, famous Tudor court painter, Hans Holbein, arrived at her home to paint her and her sister, Amalia. They were under consideration to be the next wife of King Henry VIII. Jane Seymour had died after giving birth to the future Edward VI. Henry had remained single for a record of 2 years after Jane's death, but was now casting about looking for a new wife. Someone who could give a spare to go with his heir. Also in the running were Christina of Milan and Marie Guise. Christina was quoted as saying she would marry Henry if she had 2 heads, and Marie de Guise ended up marrying Henry's nephew, James V of Scotland. It is thought Henry's Chancellor, Thomas Cromwell, pushed him in the direction of an alliance with Cleves. Cleves could stand as a buffer between England and the Holy Roman Empire, and France. France and the Holy Roman Empire had just signed a treaty setting the two against England. A buffer was going to be necessary. But Henry couldn't marry anyone, and was very concerned if Anne would be up to his standards. Cromwell reassured Henry, "Every man praiseth the beauty of Anne, as well for the face as for the whole body. She excelleth as far the Duchess of Milan as the golden sun excelleth the silver moon." Not wanting to take any chances, Holbein was dispatched. Henry must have liked what he saw because the treaty was signed on October 4, 1539, and Anne was on her way a few weeks later. Please keep in mind that at this time Henry was no longer the golden young king of his youth. He was close to 50 years old and had become rather grotesque. He had gained untold amounts of weight, and portraits show his small eyes and rosebud mouth buried in fat, and he appears to have no neck. He was not a young girl's dream husband, but Anne was royal. On the 27th of December, 1539, Anne landed at Deal in Kent, and she was taken to Deal Castle to rest and then on to Dover Castle. She then travelled to Canterbury, Sittingbourne, and Rochester. Henry could not wait any longer to see his new bride, and he began to travel towards her as she approached London. He disguised himself per chivalric tradition, and she was meant to immediately recognize him because of the love between them. Unfortunately, Anne was not aware of this, and her failure to recognize him shattered his romantic dream of her. He also took an instant dislike to her appearance. They were off to the worst start. At any rate, Henry was not pleased with his new bride. He blamed others for overpraising her beauty, but luckily never went after Holbein, who remained court painter. However, despite popular legend, Henry never called Anne a Flanders mare. That was a story popularized by Bishop Gilbert Bennet in the late 17th century. But Henry did look for any way to get out of the wedding. Plus, the truce between France and the Holy Roman Empire was disintegrating, so the diplomatic reasons for the marriage were gone as well. Unable to find an excuse, Henry went through with the marriage, but Anne's days as queen were numbered. On the 6th of January, 1540, Anne and Henry were married at the Royal Palace of Placentia in Greenwich. During the service, she was given a ring with the inscription, "God send me well to keep." Afterwards, the newlyweds heard Mass together. In the evening, they were ceremonially put to bed, but Henry failed to consummate the marriage. He informed his advisors that Anne's unattractiveness had left him unable to consummate the marriage. Because Henry still needed male heirs, this inability presented a serious problem to the English crown. Changes in Europe's political alliances complicated the king's lack of interest in his new wife. The forces driving the German alliance shifted, Catholic powers began making political overtures to Henry, and his Protestant wife no longer helped him consolidate his position. As weeks passed, the marriage between Henry and Anne remained unconsummated, and Henry continued to ask his council to investigate Anne's previous marriage arrangements with the Duke of Lorraine as possible grounds for annulling the marriage. In April of 1540, Henry began an affair with Anne's maid, Catherine Howard. The marriage between Henry and Anne of Cleves appeared doomed. By June of 1540, Anne had become aware of Henry's interests in Catherine Howard, and had herself admitted that her marriage remained unconsummated, and was presumably unsurprised when the king ordered her to leave the court for Richmond Palace on June 20th. A month later, Anne was informed of proceedings to annul the marriage. On July 9th, those proceedings were completed. Her entire marriage to Henry had lasted barely 6 months. Anne initially withheld her consent, but Henry offered her an arrangement that would allow her to remain in England under comfortable terms, in exchange for her acceptance of the annulment. Anne had the status of king's sister, use of a number of castles and estates, and a large annual allowance. Anne wrote to her brother, the Duke of Cleves, that she intended to remain in England, and accepted the state of affairs. Settling into life after her annulment, Anne of Cleves possessed a degree of freedom remarkable for women of her day. Although Anne was technically free to remarry, as her previous marriage had never existed in the eyes of the church or the court, she did not do so. She became friends with her previous stepdaughter, Princess Mary, later Queen, and lived briefly again at court during Mary's reign. The remainder of Anne's life was a pleasant one. She survived Henry as well as his other 5 wives. By the end of 1557, Anne was very ill. She was moved to Chelsea where she deteriorated quickly. On the 12th of July, she took to her bed and drafted her will. On the 15th of July, 1557, Anne died at the age of only 41. Mary made sure that Anne was honorably buried, and she was buried on the 3rd of August, 1557 at Westminster Abbey. It was Thomas Cromwell who persuaded Henry to consider Anne as a potential wife, and despite exaggerated descriptions of her beauty, the king agreed to the match. However, their meeting did not go as planned, and Henry blamed Anne's looks for the failure of their marriage. Nevertheless, Anne remained humble and gracious, and her settlement after the annulment made her one of the richest women in England overnight. The woman who was considered too ugly for King Henry may have been the only one to truly beat him at his own game.